Mr. David Swanson, Bacon County High School, here today to bring you an audio guide on the Cold War Day 2. Coming to you from favorite team jersey day. Got my Army football jersey on, beat Navy all day, every day. This year is our year. We will always believe this year is our year. So we are here to talk about the Cold War. This is day 2. You will have to remember that we started the Cold War on Friday of last week, and if you're in my class, you have a toolbox of notes and activities, and go ahead and turn now to what is the Cold War Day 2, and ready, set, let's go. As a reminder, this is posted as a PDF in your Google Classroom, so my recommendation to you is that you have this audio on in the background, pull up the PDF, scroll along as I talk. The resolution on the PDF is probably better than it is on the screen, and fill in your notes as we go. There are a variety of additional videos posted as well for your learning and growth opportunities. Let's remember that the Cold War presidents, we're going to call them Presidents Truman through Reagan, presidents during the Cold War. We're going to look at the important pieces of each man going forward. And then we're headed towards the modern era presidents. We are almost there. In our U.S. history class, we have almost completed all of our content curriculum, and we'll be rolling into review. Presidents of the modern era for our class, we're going to consider to be President Bush through Obama. Our class will end with the election of 2008. But of course, history is ever growing. I mean, math is complete, right? Algebra 1 that's what the class is. History is happening right in front of us every day. We will talk about President Trump and President Biden, basically current events, as much as history in the making. So we've had great conversations all year long. I know we will continue. Let's remember where we've come from, this concept of brinkmanship. You got President Kennedy and the Soviet premier, they're arm wrestling, and each man's hovering his finger over the red button connected to an atomic or hydrogen bomb that the other is sitting on. This illustration, perfect illustration for what we call mutually assured destruction. The idea that if you bomb me, I'm going to obliterate you. This concept of brinkmanship. We take each other to the edge of the cliff time after time, almost to pull the trigger on those bombs, only to back off again. And here you have the Soviet premier holding world peace hostage, maybe about to throw her off the cliff. Mutually assured destruction. You may think MAD, if you bomb me, I will destroy you. It's not a threat. It's just a promise. On Friday, we talked about the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, M&M. Marshall is money. That's how we're going to rebuild our friends in Europe. And containment, the concept of containment. We called it a play out of the playbook. And hopefully those of you who are in the splash zone will never forget it, just how easily communism can spread if you don't put a lid on it. That's right, put a lid on containment. We talked about the Korean War and the 4 phases of it. Hopefully this is just a reminder and a review. When the Japanese surrendered to the communists in the north of the Korean Peninsula, the Soviet Union took control of that area. And when the Japanese surrendered to the Americans in the south of the Korean Peninsula, Americans and democracy took control of that area. And then the Korean War, well, we're going to remember it really shouldn't be called a war. The Korean War is a conflict that tussles over that dividing line. So really with 3.5 years of war, we get a lot of back and forth. The communists push to the south. The United Nations and the Americans push them back to the north, almost into China, only to have years of back and forth. And the word we get from the World War I trenches, the stalemate. We have a stalemate over the 38th parallel, this dividing line. Just a line on the globe. It's not a line of geography. It's just a line of latitude, which separated the two sides. And after 3.5 years of fighting, separates the two sides even to today. So not to summarize the forgotten war ever so quickly, too quickly, there are important stories that come out of it. But as a review, you can just think of it as a tussle over the 38th parallel. And quite frankly, not a lot of things changed from how the conflict started. You may remember that war is not a correct term for it. We never declared war. Last time we declared war was World War II, even into the present day. Nor is it over, because to this day, no peace treaty has ever been signed. An armistice is in place, a ceasing of fire, but a peace treaty has never been signed. And technically, hostilities between the two states, North and South Korea, still continue to this day. So this headline is wildly inaccurate. It was not a war, nor is it over. The war is not yet over. Korean War, as a review. More containment in action. Today we are going to Vietnam. So got to remember the domino theory of containment. One country falls to communism, so will its neighbor, and its neighbor, bap, 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 just like the dominoes on the screen. And President Eisenhower, this was not just an idea, not just an illustration. He actually came up with what he and his policymakers believed was the sequence. China, boom, Korea, yeah, Vietnam, here we are, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand. Their predictions for who would fall and when, pretty accurate, because these are the order that the dominoes in which they started to fall. I'll post this video here. This is a video about the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Go ahead and pause my audio guide, watch this video real quick, and I hope you did. Now I will explain the Gulf of Tonkin incident. As per usual, if you're in my class, the notes you should be looking for are the highlighted words. That is the simplest definition, and of course there's always some extra necessary to make sure you understand everything. Gulf of Tonkin incident is this. United States Navy had ships in the Gulf of Tonkin. The Gulf of Tonkin, you can go ahead and look at your next screen, it's a map. Gulf of Tonkin is basically what borders Vietnam, North and South Vietnam. We were there to support the South Vietnamese as they fought into North Vietnam. Series of raids and actions into Vietnam. Remember, we have called these proxy wars. Proxy wars. We're fighting the communists through someone else. We're not fighting Russia, the Soviet Union. We're fighting communists through someone else, and in this case, it is the South Vietnamese. Well, the incident is two separate incidents that become the event that pulls us into the war. On August 2nd and August 4th, 1964, North Vietnamese naval vessels were accused of attacking two United States Navy ships. Now, if you just watched the video, and I'll summarize briefly, these two incidents are muddy. The facts of the matter are foggy. Sometimes we use the phrase the fog of war. It's questionable as to whether our Navy ships were actually attacked by Vietnamese belligerents, or was it a fishing boat that just happened to be in the water? Was it even the fog? And the captain of the USS Maddox just wasn't quite sure what he was seeing or not seeing. Either way, irrelevant, the impact of the incidents is that President Johnson responded by ordering air attacks on North Vietnam, on the North Vietnam. And prior to our attack, Johnson requests and receives Congress's approval to use military force. So this is going to escalate our involvement in Vietnam. We see this as fighting against communism. Congress approves this on the idea that we are fighting the communists abroad, not at home. We would always rather fight somewhere else than in America, and that is why Congress gives that approval. Go ahead and look at the map here. You can kind of bring yourself into the Gulf of Tonkin and see where is Vietnam. You probably recognize a lot of this from the island hopping that just happened in the South Pacific during World War II. Pretty similar map. Here we find ourselves in Southeast Asia again. This is our Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, doing what all great teachers do, using a pointer stick to point at a map and show the American public just exactly what is going on. He's pointing to the Gulf of Tonkin. This is Vietnam. He's pointing to where our U.S. ships were. He's describing the incident to the best of our understanding. And sometimes, you know how politicians do, they make the facts fit what they need. Well, if you watch the video, you saw this quote, "No actual visual sightings by the USS Maddox. We suggest complete evaluation before taking any further action." Those are the words from the captain of the ship. Initially, "Oh no, we're under attack," with a little bit of a pause. This happens a lot, okay? If emotions are high, you just need to pause. With a little bit of a pause, the captain says, "Actually, we have not made any visual contact, and we suggest slowing down for complete evaluation before taking any further action." Well, the president and the Secretary of State did not slow down and take complete evaluation. They jumped forward into a resolution, which is going to draw us more into the conflict in Vietnam. We're not going to use the word war, very similar to in Korea. I know we'll call it the Vietnam War, I know we'll call them Vietnam War veterans. It's appropriate, but it is technically a conflict. It is technically a policing action, not a declared war. Gulf of Tonkin Resolution is this. It gives the president authorization to conduct military operations in Southeast Asia without a formal declaration of war. This is a marked change in U.S. policy by now placing troops into combat without a declaration of war. Previously, we had been advising and assisting in Vietnam, but now we're putting boots on the ground. We're putting soldiers on the soil of Vietnam, and I do believe most of y'all have an understanding that it's going to be a long and bloody conflict. In the end, it's going to cost 58,000 American lives. That's from combat, not even disease and other situations. This is the start of that. The document you see on the screen, this is, if you ever wondered what a congressional law looks like, this is a formal resolution, and it states that the president can use the military in Southeast Asia. I'll blow it up here, and I'll put my Mickey Mouse finger at a certain level, pointing to a very important part of the document. It's actually not even a part of the document. It's a missing part of the document. If you look in close, you'll notice that there is no expiration date. This document didn't say you can use troops for 30 days, and then they have to come home. You can use troops for 6 months, and then they have to come home. You can use the troops until Christmas, and then the boys have to come home. Problem with this is that there was no end point, no expiration date, and that let Johnson and the next presidents use troops in Southeast Asia for an indefinite amount of time. Major mistake by Congress, abused by the presidents, Johnson and the men after him, who continue to have troops in Vietnam. And we fix this in the future. Congress realizes its mistake, and we give expiration dates to the use of force in the future, and we will talk about that when we get there. Another video here, I will link this. I simply encourage you to make sure that you understand the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution from my talking, from your reading, from your note-taking, and from any of these videos that I have posted. From the resolution, U.S. troop strength gradually grows up to 500,000 men by the year 1968, and the growth of our military in this region leads the Soviet Union to respond similarly. And China, known as the People's Republic of China, to start giving aid to North Vietnam. The two communist countries are now supporting North Vietnam, and we, the United States, the democracy-based country, are supporting South Vietnam. So very similar setup to as in the Korean conflict. North, sponsored by the communists. South, supported by the United States and democracy. Kind of a battle of oppression and freedom. On your notes there, pretty simple, just got to get the definition of U.S. involvement in Vietnam. The U.S. military got involved in Vietnam at the request of South Vietnam to protect them from a communist takeover by North Vietnam. At this point in class, I usually stop and show this video, kind of set the scene and lay the foundation for what fighting in Vietnam was like. Very different from the wars that we've talked about so far. No trenches, no massive land invasions, jungle fighting where it's hard to know where the enemy is, and quite frankly, even who is the enemy. The enemy is not necessarily wearing a uniform. So I'll let you pause and watch this video with the disclaimer that this is not historical footage. As a matter of fact, it is a 3-minute scene from the American classic, Forrest Gump. And believe it or not, even though the characters are not true figures, I believe this 3-4 minute clip does a great job of illustrating the war in Vietnam. Moving right along, so in the Vietnam War, you got a map here. You got the communist North versus the democratic South. The communist North really didn't play by the rules. See, in America, when we declare war, we go to, or when we use the military, we usually have some boundaries about how to use them. Now, I know I just said that there was no expiration date, but the U.S. military had to operate in South Vietnam. We could not legally cross into Cambodia or Laos. You see those neighboring countries there. The communists, the North Vietnamese, didn't necessarily have to play by those same rules. So if you follow the red line there, you see that a lot of communist activity cut through Laos and Cambodia. The communist guerrillas, their fighters, the soldiers, they'd come across the border into South Vietnam, attack, and withdraw back across the border into Cambodia. And U.S. troops couldn't necessarily follow them across that border. So they would come, fight, and withdraw to safety. Cross back the border, fight, kill, and withdraw back to safety. This made it very complicated to fight that type of enemy. Another reason I like this map is because it shows the U.S. in that little inset there, okay, the little smaller portion of the map, shows the United States, and then it shows where Vietnam is. And as you can see, there's a whole ocean between the two. So it became very difficult for Americans to understand why do my son, I'm from Alabama, I'm from Georgia, I'm from North Carolina, I'm from Oklahoma, why does my son have to join the military or be drafted into the military, go across the ocean into this little sliver of, what's that word? Vietnam? A lot of people couldn't even point out Vietnam on a map, maybe even couldn't pronounce the word. Why do I have to go and fight there? A lot of Americans couldn't understand why this little sliver of Asia requires my son's service, my son's dying for Vietnam. So we understood fighting the great evil Hitler, and we understood fighting the Japanese who bombed us first at Pearl Harbor. But a lot of Americans couldn't really understand why we had to go fight this little sliver of land called Vietnam. And that's going to lead to some struggles on the home front. This picture right here, this is the leader of the North Vietnamese Army. His name is Ho Chi Minh. His army is going to be called the Viet Cong. So the North Vietnamese Army, nicknamed the Viet Cong. And they're going to use guerrilla warfare tactics. So imagine, just remember, what is guerrilla warfare? It's fighting on the land, run, shoot, hide, move, break contact, live to fight another day, small units, small attacks, ambush style attacks against your stronger opponent. The Vietnamese were not, by the numbers or on paper, the better army, but they used these guerrilla warfare tactics to their advantage, because just like the Americans in the Revolutionary War knew the land, it was their home, had a cause to fight for, we're fighting for liberty, freedom, we're fighting to break away from the king. Well, in this case, that was the Viet Cong. They were fighting on their lands, okay? They knew the roads, the trails, the streams, where to hide, where to fight, how to retreat, where you could, not be found, all those little trails that could help you get out fast. They were fighting for their homeland. They've also been fighting for decades, okay? They fought the French before the Americans, and the British before that. So Ho Chi Minh has been fighting his whole life, and he's leading men who've been fighting their whole lives. And hey, the Americans are just one more occupying force. We'll beat them too. Beat the Brits, beat the French. Now we'll beat the Americans. That was the attitude. They were supported by, they took help from whoever would support them. The Soviet Union just happens to be his friends of the week. So he's okay with communism. He's okay with the Soviet Union as long as they keep the support coming. To illustrate the Vietnam War, this is a very different style of fighting than we've seen before. So we're used to sweeping across masses of land. We're going to take back France, heading towards Berlin. We're going to island hop. We're going to take the whole island. We're going to own it. Well, this was fighting 1 kilometer of the jungle at a time. It wasn't about taking back a whole island, or it wasn't, there was no concrete finish point. When we get here, we have secured the objective. It was just daily patrols in the jungle and all the dangers of the jungle that came with that. The rain, the climate of Vietnam, very different from what we've experienced in the past. And you can see the soldiers having to deal with the water there, sandbags to try to keep dry. Americans really like their equipment. Americans really like their technology. Well, tanks worked in the last war. Okay, tanks helped us beat Hitler. Let's take them to Vietnam. Tank's not going to work the same way in the jungle. So this is an American tank still stuck in Vietnam. I imagine that people, tourists, go and take a picture with this. And for some, I'm sure they see it as an example of how they beat the Americans, because the tank is still there. Now, there is a piece of technology that was super helpful and new to the battlefield, and that is the helicopter. Helicopter is pretty normal today. I've flown in a lot of helicopters. It's a great way to get delivered to the battlefield. Well, in this time, prior to the helicopter, if you left your base, you had to walk to where you were going, or drive to where you were going. And of course, you had to experience all the dangers of the ground while you were getting to where you were going. The helicopter now gives a fast, easier, from the air way to be delivered to the battlefield. So if we know of enemy activity in such and such sector, you can get on your helicopter, fly there, get off, fight the area, fight whatever enemy activity is in the area, and the helicopter can take you off the battlefield as well. Helicopter is helpful for evacuating casualties. You don't have to carry someone to the hospital. You can load them up onto the helicopter, and certain helicopters began to be medevac helicopters, specific for hospitals. So helicopter changes the battlefield in Vietnam, and a key movie that highlights the helicopter, you know, I've got a lot of movies in the back of the room there, We Were Soldiers. Mel Gibson and We Were Soldiers really highlights the use of the helicopter in the Vietnam War. Thing about fighting in the jungles is that the North Vietnamese knew where they were. They knew how to use their land, and they also had variety of many miles of tunnels already built from their previous wars, and then of course they're still digging more tunnels to try to beat the Americans. When I look at this picture, something I noticed, something that really stands out to me is that this is not a big hulking man. This is not someone that's going to go fight in the MMA, right? Go fight in the octagon. Americans like big and strong. This guy is super skinny, and in that case, helps him fit down this super narrow tunnel. And now imagine this is the forest floor. Now today this is a bit of a museum, and you know, people can go and look and learn from the history. That's what he's demonstrating here. But imagine a Vietnamese fighter, okay, a Viet Cong. He is waiting for the Americans to walk on by. Right? He knows that they're going to be patrolling in this area. He's waiting. He pops up, shoots, bang, 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 bang. The Americans looking around, look left, look right. Where's it coming from? And meanwhile, he's gone back into the tunnel, covered himself up with the leaves, and the American patrol just got shot at. Maybe 4, 5, 6 guys got shot, some killed, some wounded, and nobody knows where the shooter went. Do you have to be big and hulking to shoot a gun? You do not. So the Vietnamese used the strengths that they had, their tunnel network. Doesn't matter that they weren't big. It's okay that they were small, because small guys can still shoot a gun in a lot of ways. Picture here shows someone sliding down into that tunnel. Here is maybe the inside, the underground of this tunnel network. So very similar to the Japanese in the South Pacific. They had tunnels on Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Similarly here, the Vietnamese, North Vietnamese have a tunnel network. And sometimes the tunnel system opened up into a whole room, place where you could eat, place where the commanders could open up their maps and plan their next attack. Of course, that's going to help protect you from above ground bombing as well, and just keep everything a secret under the ground. The Americans did have a way to try to combat this, and it is men called tunnel rats. So you got Sergeant Payne here. He was probably the smallest guy in his platoon, right? He's the skinniest guy. So they said, Payne, here's a flashlight. Here's a pistol. Go get him. Guys like Sergeant Payne would go head first with a flashlight and a pistol, shimmy on through the tunnel. Obviously, this guy got his, stopped to take a picture. But I got to imagine being a tunnel rat is pretty scary. You're going through the tunnel, and if you see something, your instinct needs to be to shoot it right away. Problem, a lot of times that would be a bad guy. A lot of times that would be a Vietnamese, Viet Cong in the tunnel. Sometimes, unfortunately, it would be women, children, or just others hiding, innocent civilians hiding in the tunnels as well. But the American tunnel rats were notable during the Vietnam War. If you watch the Forrest Gump clip, you saw him being a bit of a tunnel rat as well. Another peril of the jungle was booby traps. Booby traps all throughout the jungle floor. The booby traps were not as harmful to the body as they were to the mind. Yes, it would hurt a soldier, okay, if you fell into the booby trap, and I'll describe this here in a second. If you got caught by a booby trap, you could be hurt or killed. But what booby traps did to more people was mess them up between the ears, because now, if you heard about a guy from one unit over, right, Johnny from Bravo Company, man, he fell into this booby trap and he got spiked. You can look at the picture there. You see that there's spikes underneath the trap door. If you hear that your friend Johnny fell into this booby trap and got spiked, and then today I'm going out on patrol, what am I doing with every step that I take? I'm going real slow. I'm being real careful. I'm kind of testing out my weight before I take the next step, and it's messing me up between the ears. I might not fall into a booby trap. I may never even see a booby trap. But because other guys have been hurt by booby traps, it affects how I fight the war. That was the biggest thing with booby traps. What you see here is called a punji stick pit. And from the picture here, you can see that there's a bit of a trap door, a bit of a false floor. Now I'll come to this next picture here. The idea would be that there's a false floor. Okay, it could be the thatched bamboo. It might be a rotating door. and they covered up with the forest, okay, leaves and dirt and twigs and all the foliage. And when a 200-pound American, especially American bigger person, especially with all the equipment, 210-pound American sets foot onto the false ceiling, goes right through it, and underneath that false ceiling are these bamboo sharpened sticks that would impale you, right, into the side, into the legs. Now, the wild part about a punji stick pit is that it really wasn't designed to kill a soldier, it was designed to wound a soldier. The North Vietnamese knew that Americans take great care to protect their injured, and they're always going to help that injured person get back to the hospital. So a lot of times the trap would be set. Soldier would fall into it, soldier is injured, and then once the Americans are caring for the wounded man, that's when the North Vietnamese, would ambush everyone else. Tending to the wounded, kind of let your guard down, or you're busy, your concentration is broken. That's when they would kill the rest of the Americans, the rest of the platoon. So many different examples: tripwires, bombs. Sometimes the bombs weren't large enough to kill the person, but just simply to blow the leg off. Same story. Once someone is wounded, that's when the second part of the ambush would occur. And then one more little piece about punji sticks here. Sometimes on that sharpened bamboo tip, they'd add a little bit of poison. And sometimes that poison was, some of you probably guessed it, human feces. Sometimes they would smear fecal matter, I'll just call it what it is, poop. Sometimes they would smear poop onto that sharpened stick, and when that goes into a person's body, okay, when the excrement goes into the body, you're gonna have infection. So the infection from the wound could kill the person. Pretty torturous way to die. And these are the perils of the jungle. This is why soldiers were so on edge patrolling in the jungle, because the enemy could be anywhere, and even if the enemy's not there, booby trap could be on the next step that I take. These are the perils of fighting in the jungles of Vietnam. Some tragedies coming from the Vietnam War. There's an instance known as the My Lai Massacre, and in this case, an American platoon was sent to a village to clear it out of all enemy fighters. Go find all the men that are hiding in this village. One of the difficulties of the war is that you didn't really know who the enemy was. He didn't wear a uniform. He didn't have a label that said Vietnam Army, right? American soldiers wear uniforms, but the Vietnamese, the fighters, the guerrilla fighters, could have worn anything. So they might shoot at you, cack, 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 and then hide their gun and go back to the farming, go back to the fields and farm. Made it really difficult to know who the enemy was. And this played with a lot of soldiers between the ears as well. Where is he at? Is that an old man, or is that a fighter? Is that a child, or is that someone that's going to shoot at me? It's difficult. It's difficult to know. Well, the tragedy of the My Lai Massacre is that an American platoon goes into the village to find the military-aged males, to find the fighters, and what they end up doing is massacring a whole village. Men, women, and children, old men, women, and children. They kill everyone in the village. And as this story becomes known, I'm not making any apologies for what happens in the people who did the shooting in My Lai. No justification for shooting women, children, unarmed men, old men. Fighting a war is one thing. Murdering civilians, never okay. The difficulty, the negatives of this situation is that once this made the news, you can see this is a newspaper clipping there. Once this made the news, it started to make the Americans look like the bad guys. It started to make people at home wonder, what are we doing in Vietnam? Killing women, killing babies? Why? Why are we fighting in Vietnam? So we start to have a downward slope of support at home, a downward spiral. People are not supporting the war at home any longer. I'll post this video as well. You can see the statement there. Nearly 500 civilians were murdered in the My Lai Massacre. A very low point, very sad moment in human history and U.S. history, part of the Vietnam War. Picture here illustrates the draft. The draft was how we gained soldiers for the military. Not everybody who went to Vietnam was a volunteer. Today, if you want to join the military today, you volunteer. You know the recruiters throw the benefits at you, college money, here's a salary, here's a paycheck. If you get out of the military, you still have all your skills. Today, it's a volunteer army. But in the time of the Vietnam War, we actually drafted people into service. We pulled their name out of a hat, and they were forced to join the military. The way this actually works is almost like a lottery. You see the lotto bin here, and what this guy's doing is he's drawing birthdays. So if your birthday is drawn, I'll go with mine, January 17th, children born, or youths born in it'd be 1951. You're 18 years old. Everyone born January 17th, 1951. You are drafted into the military. So simply put, that's about how it worked. And they would do this on national television. So people would literally be watching. Am I about to be drafted? Did they pick what's the day? Oh, not my birthday. Yes. Oh, he's picking another one? Oh, not my birthday. Yes. Or, oh, it's my birthday. I got to go to the military. I just got drafted into the military. A lot of people were opposed to the war, didn't want to join the military, but if you got drafted, you either had to go to the military or be arrested. Now, that gives us examples of protests. Some people were drafted and refused to go. They burned their draft card. You can't draft me, I'm burning my card. Well, that's still a crime, okay? They were breaking the law because they hadn't been drafted. Well, you can't draft me if I go to Canada. A lot of men went north to Canada to hide from the draft. Pictures here are protests against the Vietnam War, and I put these two pictures side by side because on the left, you got a protest in Washington, D.C., right, the seat of the Capitol. On the right, you got a protest in Berkeley, Oakland, California. You got protests from coast to coast, right? Washington, D.C. on the East Coast, California on the West Coast, and everywhere in between. A lot of the country was opposed to the Vietnam War. Why are we there in the first place? Why are we killing women and children? Why is my son dying for some Asian country? Why are we fighting the Vietnam War? A lot of people were opposed to the Vietnam War. 1968. 1968 is going to be a very formative year in U.S. history. So I'm going to talk about 1968 several times over the next couple of class periods. So I'm just kind of introducing that to you right now. The Vietnam War in 1968 was basically at a stalemate. Back and forth, no one making a whole lot of progress. But unfortunately, this is a terrible situation for public trust in government. Our generals and our elected leaders have been saying that we're winning. They've been inflating body counts, right? We are on the move. We are winning. But those were a lot of lies. We actually weren't winning. Because of these lies, Congress authorizes 200,000 more troops to go to Vietnam. General William Westmoreland, West Pointer by the way, General William Westmoreland asks Congress for 200,000 more men. Hey, this will finish them off, right? This is the last push, the last surge that we need to finish them off, and Congress approves. Okay? And Congress approves, so now, if you're watching the draft, there's 200,000 more young men going to be drafted into the military, so you're probably like, oh, I hope it's not me. You might have been like that. But the problem is, the communists were not on the verge of defeat. In fact, they were preparing for a massive strike against U.S. bases and U.S. troops, and this is going to be known as the Tet Offensive. So another thing where I will post a video for the Tet Offensive. Tet, we need to understand this for starters. Tet is the Buddhist New Year. Most people in Vietnam are Buddhist, so much like Christians would observe Christmas. Most everyone in Vietnam is observing Tet as a holy holiday. So the idea was, the American attitude was, they're celebrating their holiday. Ain't no way they're going to attack us now. Well, for a country that has a founding father who attacked the British on Christmas Day, we probably shouldn't have been thinking like that. In this case, we were on the other end of the attack, right? George Washington goes and fights on Christmas Day. We like that. Well, in this case, we're on the other end of the attack, and the Tet Offensive was the beginning of a series of coordinated attacks from the North Vietnamese on more than 100 cities, outposts, large bases, small bases. This is not just one day. This is a lengthy period of attacks. And what's really notable about this is that a lot of the carnage is caught on camera. A lot of the Tet Offensive and the various attacks are shown on television. And when you show the carnage on television, all of a sudden people no longer believe that we're winning. Okay, you generals, you politicians, you can't lie to us anymore. We're looking at the camera, we're looking at the screen, and we know we are not winning right now. That's my neighbor who's bloody and headed to the hospital. A lot of American families saw their loved ones or their friends, their neighbors on television, and no longer did the American public believe that we were winning the war. Map here kind of shows the Tet Offensive, shows how the Vietnamese came across the borders of Cambodia and Laos into American-held territories, American bases, and prosecuted the war in that fashion. Picture here shows an average American family watching the carnage on TV. You can see Dad there. He's in his suit, shirt and tie. He's spent the day at the office, but Vietnam now becomes known as the television war. First time war is shown live on TV. We had video footage from World War II, but not really in live action, not current. We actually had, it took a long time for that video to come to America, and then they got put into movie theaters, so not quite the same. And that was generally positive news. We wanted to show that we were winning in World War II. It was generally positive news. This time, the media is going to take a little bit of a harsher perspective and show the ugly side of the war. And Americans are going to start to think, that's a bunch of lies. The politicians have been feeding me just a bunch of lies, and that's going to sow mistrust. Mistrust in the hearts and minds of the American public. What the generals say is not true. I can watch the TV and I can see that they've been lying to me. Now I don't trust the government. Very iconic picture, one in particular that comes out of time frame. These are just good American boys, 18, 19, 20 years old, losing. We don't like to see Americans losing, and we've been told that we're winning, only now to really see that we are in fact losing the war. Walter Cronkite, very trusted name in news. He was a wartime reporter at the time. He says this: "It seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate." And a lot of people did trust him. They didn't trust the president, but they trusted Walter Cronkite. And if he said it was going to end in a stalemate, then dang, why are we still over there? Why are my boys, why is my son still over in Vietnam? Why is he still at risk? Bring him home, Mr. President. Bring our boys home. Well, the United States government had said we were near victory, but now it became clear that we were not as close to winning the war as officials had said, evidenced by the extreme force that was shown throughout the the Tet Offensive. And ultimately, this has a very big impact on the 1968 presidential election. The 1968 Tet Offensive, the 1968 presidential election, President Johnson, right there, he's tired. I love this picture. Kind of shows the crease lines on his head. The man is tired. He could have run for re-election. He decides not to. So he willingly steps down. He lets the Democrat Party nominate a different person, and him vacating the presidency is going to change the country because it's going to lead to a change in leadership. Vietnam War at home. So I kind of already said it. There are many protests against the war, against the draft, against the bombing campaigns. Television contributes to make the war extremely unpopular at home. Look at the variety of posters there. No more war in Vietnam, peace in Vietnam, use your head, not your draft card. People wanted to burn their draft cards. There's a very famous chant that comes from this time period. People would gather at the United States Capitol or at their state capitals, and they would chant, "Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today?" LBJ is the president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ. "Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today?" And that's got to wear on a man. That's why Johnson got tired. And that's also a powerful statement kind of showing why are we still in Vietnam. Well, let's fast forward a little bit. Johnson is not in the election, and the next president is going to be Richard Nixon, Republican. So change in leadership, change in parties. We'll talk about each of these presidents as we finish out the class as well. Now it's the year 1973. President Nixon wants to end the war in Vietnam. It's one of his campaign promises, right? I will end the war in Vietnam, ideally with a victory, but I will end the war in Vietnam. President Nixon wants to reestablish positive relationships with world leaders. See, the Vietnam War has taken America down on the world stage. World War I, victory. World War II, victory. Vietnam starts to show some cracks in the American military. The world doesn't look at us in the same way anymore. American economy and trade is impacted by our struggles in the Vietnam War. So he seeks to end the Vietnam War due to international pressure and home front pressure, the anti-war protests at home. His process is going to be called Vietnamization, Take the word Vietnam. Vietnamization. This is on your notes. What it is the U.S. policy of gradually withdrawing troops and then transferring that responsibility to the government of South Vietnam. Basically, we're leaving, and you are responsible for your country now. This would essentially leave a state of civil war between North and South Vietnam. Right? I'm out. My people are leaving. My equipment is leaving. Here's a little bit of money. I'm out. Vietnamization. The map here, another poster board with the man pointing. You see the peak of U.S. troops at just over 500,000, and then the gradual withdrawal ever since. This is the current moment, 27,000 troops remaining, and then President Nixon is describing a full withdrawal Vietnamization. Copy-paste, this is about what we did in Afghanistan as well. We don't use the word Afghanistanization, but very similarly, current events. American troops in Afghanistan reaches a peak, and then the withdrawal until the Biden administration, just a short 2 years ago, withdraws all American presence from Afghanistan and gives the country back over to the Afghans. And we got to keep paying attention to world events to see how that is working out. Well, here's how it ended in Vietnam. Not good. U.S. leaves Vietnam in 1973, and the North invades the South less than 2 years later and takes the whole country into a communist government. So essentially, all the fighting and dying of the Vietnam War did not produce results that led to democracy, and essentially the South Vietnamese cannot hold on for even 2 more years before the country falls to communism. In the world today, there are 5 communist countries: North Korea, China, Laos, which borders Vietnam, Cuba, just a few miles off the coast of Florida, and Vietnam. This is very close to President Eisenhower's domino theory. Other than Cuba, those other 4 countries are listed. Picture on the map here, a picture on the flag here is Ho Chi Minh with the red flag of Vietnam. Today it's not North and South Vietnam. It's just Vietnam, and it is a communist country. This is a picture of one of the last helicopters out of the American embassy in Saigon before Americans are gone, and essentially before the embassy falls to the North Vietnamese in the year 1975. And this is an eerie side-by-side photograph. On the left, you have the U.S. evacuation from Afghanistan in 2021, and on the right, you have the U.S. evacuation from Saigon, South Vietnam, in 1975. Very eerie, the same type of helicopter, the same horizon line, kind of a picture. Goes to show Vietnam veterans and Afghanistan veterans have kind of a linked lineage. The men who fought for each other. We were part of what our government was trying to do. Men who fought did nothing wrong to lose the war. Politicians, on the other hand, have made decisions that lead to futility. And sometimes veterans, Vietnam veterans, and I'll just raise my hand and speak for myself, Afghanistan war veterans, sometimes we wonder if we made a difference. Is there any lasting change from what I did? The summary, in the end, so in Vietnam, the United States was gradually increasing involvement to combat communism. This is containment in action. Started as aid, moved to training, advise, assist, aid, and then ultimately led to combat troops involved in combat. And the more that the involvement ticked up, the less that the American public was willing to pay the cost. The more costly the war became for money and for lives, the less the American public was willing to tolerate it. And eventually that leads to the withdrawal. How do we remember the Vietnam War today? In Washington, D.C., this is the Vietnam Memorial Wall. And on this wall, there are 58,000 names of men and women who died in the Vietnam War, died in combat. And it's a very beautiful place to visit, very serene. You can see the Washington Monument in the background. Should you ever find yourself in Washington, D.C., this is definitely something you want to visit. Pretty powerful picture here. This is a portrait, but the man in the shirt and the vest, and he's kind of like in a business attire, he's a veteran. He fought the war. He's got friends on the wall. He's got their names on the wall, and as he touches the wall, it's reflective. The stone of the wall is very high polished and reflective. It's almost like his friends are reaching back and touching out to him as well. See, a really cool thing about the wall is that the names are not alphabetical. They are listed in the order that the person was killed. So if you're in a battle and 5 of your friends were killed right beside you, all 5 of their names are listed together. So a lot of veterans can go and visit the wall and find the year, find the dates where their friends were killed, and all the names are right there. We talked a lot about names on walls. I would always challenge us, encourage us to remember it's not 58,000 as a number. Every number has a name, every name has a story, every story is a person who didn't get to come home. A husband, a father, a mother, a daughter, a wife, men and women on the Vietnam Wall who didn't get to come home. So while we say 58,000, wow, that's a big number, let's remember that comes down to one. Every one of them is an individual as well. Every one of them had a story. I've had the chance to visit. You can see the mask, COVID time frame, and there's a video on the back side of this of my tour through Washington, D.C. This is another piece right next to the Vietnam Wall, and this is called the Three Soldiers. I love this statue. It's probably one of the smaller memorials in Washington, D.C. You know, people go to Lincoln and people go to the Vietnam Wall. This little statue, these 3 soldiers, not as popular as the Lincoln Memorial, perhaps, but I think it's one of the most powerful statues in Washington, D.C. Watch my video, because there's some details I talk about in that video as well. How can we remember veterans right here in Alma? Well, where is this? You're probably smiling, you're nodding. This is right across from Dairy Queen, and this is the Alma Veterans Wall of Honor at the Veterans Plaza. We do have a old dismantled Army helicopter. The thing used to fly, but it now kind of represents veterans in our community. And we have the similar wall. Now, these are not names of those who have died. These are names of Alma residents who have served. And you may have a family member on one of these pillars right here. We have 2. From my family, there are 2 side by side in the Vietnam War era. Again, not people who died, but people who served. You may have a relative on this wall right here. Round out talking about Vietnam, 2 great movies, We Were Soldiers with Mel Gibson and Platoon. I love the tagline of Platoon, the first casualty of war is innocence. These young boys went to war innocent, and they left the war, their innocence left behind, changed forever. War is hell. Let's remember, war is hell. Post this video right here as well, and this concludes the Cold War Day 2, our walk through Vietnam. Stay on top of your packet. Make sure you go backwards if you need to. You can read forwards, as tomorrow we will talk about President Kennedy and his accomplishments in the Cold War specifically. From Room 1206, go Army, beat Navy, Mr. Swanson is out.